Please don't do that.
I'm not doing that, don't worry. Actually, I don't think I'm capable of a handlebar mustache. Yeah. And you know, at 5'5.5", that mustache you'll be wearing me as opposed to the other way around.
This is true.
Yeah. All right. Who, Lisa, are you looking at attendees, or are you Savita, who's looking to see who's here and who isn't? We've got a few minutes left.
And I have the list up, but I'm not checking it.
Yeah. Well, we still got a few minutes. We'll see who shows up.
Yeah, we've had a few committee members join, but we're still waiting for a few others.
Okay. Solids is fun. Lisa, have we started the recording? Do you know?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
Teresa
Thank
said
you.
she's starting in a few minutes, but we have. Okay.
I'm not going to say anything untoward now. It will be saved for posterity. Yeah, I can avoid that. Lisa, show about 8 or 9, 10 people on from our subcommittee, just so you know.
Okay, thank you. It's right at 3 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I see another committee member has joined. So Savita, you let me know when you want to get started. We're about half of the committee is present. From what I can see, you may know better, but.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we do not have a requirement of a quorum, so
Right. No, I know we don't need a quorum. I just don't like to get started if we don't have, many of the committee members, but I'm looking at about half. Is that right?
Yeah, I am looking at the same number.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. The recording has started. My name is Lisa Clark, and I am the co-chair, one of the co-chairs of the Livable Places Action Committee. And it is 3 o'clock on Tuesday, June 15th. And we'll call this meeting to order. At this meeting, as you just heard that echo, the best way to do this is keep your cameras off and your microphones off unless you've been asked to speak. That way it helps with the audio video quite a bit. So we appreciate your cooperation with that. The public will be allotted time to speak, but it will be at the end of the meeting. You'll be given 2 minutes. And what I'd ask that you do is that you put a note in the chat room that you'd like to speak, and we'll recognize you at the end of the meeting. For those commissioners, for those committee members that are with us, if you'd like to speak, either raise your hand, and the raise of hand is for committee members only, or you can unmute yourself and state your last name and I'll call on you. If you're calling in by telephone, use *6 to mute and unmute yourself. And let's see, I believe that I am ready now to call the roll. So when I call your name, if you'd please unmute yourself and say that you're here, I would appreciate it. So again, I'm Lisa Clark, I'm co-chair and I am present. And my co-chair, Sunny Garza, is here with us as well.
Present.
Thank you. John Blunt.
Present.
Antoine Bryant. Don't believe Mr. Bryant is with us yet. Toby Cole.
Present.
Steve Curry.
Present.
Curtis Davis. Okay, Mike Dishberger. Zion
Here.
I'm sorry. Is that you, Mike?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Zion Escobar.
Escobar, present.
Thank you. Melissa Fontenot.
Present.
Thank you. Peter Friedman.
Present.
Thank you. Louis Guajardo. Louis, are you with us? Okay. Gwen Guidry. Gwen, are you there? Okay. Omar Isfar. Omar. All right. Ron Lindsay. Don't hear Mr. Lindsay. How about Kirby? Lindsay. Thank you, Ron.
Present, sorry.
You're fine. Kirby Lou.
Present.
Thanks. Meg Listow.
Meg Lusto, present.
Thank you. Johanna Mahmoud. Was that a present I heard? Ms. Mahmoud? All right. Sean Massack.
Present.
Thank you. I'm assuming you're taking Dustin's place. Is that correct? You're representing Dustin?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Kathy Payton. Kathy, are you with us? All right. Megan Sigler.
Sigler, present.
Thanks, Megan. Sherry Smith.
Smith, present.
Thank you. Scott Kubler. All right, so let's see. Sandy Stevens. All right. Bobby Tyson. Fernando Zamaripa. And our subject matter expert, Andy Tees with the Houston Apartment Association. Are you with us, Andy?
Yes, Andy Tees is here.
Great, thanks. Okay. Well, I believe that that is it for me, and I'm going to hand it over now to Director Margaret Wallace Brown.
Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you, Ms. Clark. I appreciate it. Good to see everybody. Again, welcome to the Livable Places Action Committee. So my name is Margaret Wallace Brown, and I'm the Director of the Planning and Development Department. I have a couple of quick things I just want to remind everybody that are going on in the department, in addition to the work we're doing here. As part of this group, we are engaging a consultant who will help us do deeper research into best practices nationwide that can help us identify consequences of the work that you're doing, and will also, probably most importantly, help us graphically illustrate some of the ideas that you're talking about here. We will have that contract in place hopefully in July. If you're interested in learning more about it, we're going to be giving an update on your committee process and the consultant contract to the Quality of Life Committee, the City Council Quality of Life Committee in June. And I don't have the date in June in front of me, but we'll put it in the chat. If you're interested, you can log on and watch that there. I do want to let you know that we will have no meeting in July, so go ahead and plan your out-of-town trips and be back here in August to roll up your sleeves and get back to work again. And then last thing, I just want to kind of fill you in on what's going on with the department itself. We are back in the office. All of us are working back in the office as of June 1st, and we are holding face-to-face meetings with our customers. If you are a customer, or if you have, or if you need to come up and talk with us in the planning department, we are here to do that. We are continuing to do meetings virtually if that makes you more comfortable, and we'll also work with you over the telephone. We are starting to get a little bit more caught up on our recordation appointments, but that continues to vex us. There are lots of challenges with those right now. The wait getting an appointment is much longer than we want, but we are working on short time. So call us at 832-393-6600 or visit us at houstonplanning.com if you want to know anything else about the department. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Appreciate that. I will now turn this over to our committee project manager, Ms. Savita Bandy.
Thank you, Co-Chair Ms. Clark. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Savita Bandy. So here is the agenda for today. We will, next slide, please. We will do a recap on what we presented during the May meeting. Yes, we can stay here. Thank you, Devin. We will do a recap of what was presented during the May meeting, and then we will continue the discussion on single family and multifamily residential developments with some preliminary thoughts. Next, we will present research on accessory dwelling units from other cities and have discussion. This will be followed by homework activities and expectations for the next meeting. We'll have time for public comments at the end. So here in this slide, you can see the timeline of where we are today. And we are getting very close to 1 year in the process. In today's meeting, we will continue the discussion, and it is actually a very important topic, and we want to thoroughly vet the ideas through the committee. Some content may feel repetitive, but the attempt here is to gather feedback from all of the committee members. This will help us weigh in the pros and cons of any recommendation changes. It will help us make informed proposals and also help us work out the details with the technical advisory group, which is going to happen next. The purpose of today's meeting is to have an open discussion, and so please do not hold your questions to the end. So as a recap, here is what was discussed last month. Our goal is to have regulations that encourage the development and preservation of variety of housing types at various price points that meet the needs of middle-income households, making housing affordable. One way to provide variety of options housing options is by allowing missing middle housing types, and also by allowing homeowners to add additional units on lots. From the data, we learned that the cost of housing has increased. The rate of homeownership increases as the household income increases, and there is a growing demand for rental housing. That is the data we saw last time. And with respect to the challenges, we learned that the current regulations are not conducive to adding an additional unit when you already have a duplex on the lot. The multifamily regulations create limitations in terms of requiring a private street on the property. And there are also limitations with respect to the parking requirements sometimes. And we also discussed parking requirements of what the current requirements are. And we went through the recommendations from our residential buffering study that we did, which is the best practices study. And some of those recommendations were to allow up to 4 units on a lot. And these are recommendations from the study, not our recommendations, but what the consultant provided us during the study. The focus, it was recommended to focus on not the density, but the floor area ratio and massing of the structure, reducing minimum parking requirements, and encouraging shared spaces, allowing more accessory dwelling units, and providing different housing types, especially for corner lots. So these were some of the recommendations that we presented, which came from the study. Next slide, please. So quickly, again, the single family definition: a lot with one building containing not more than 2 separate units is considered single family. A main unit with a detached secondary unit no larger than 900 square feet is also considered single family. A building containing one dwelling unit on one lot that is connected with a party wall to another dwelling unit on another lot is also considered single family. So here is how it actually looks. Next slide, please. So this in this, you can actually see an example, an aerial view of these different styles of housing that are allowed under the current definition. You all are already aware of this. We saw this last time. The parking requirements are 2 parking spaces required for a single family unit. If there is a detached unit, no larger than 900 square feet, there is only 1 additional parking required. Imagining if it is a duplex with the attached units, then 2 and 2, so there will be 4 spaces in total on that particular property when it is an attached unit. You can also see the multifamily requirements. The difference between single family and multifamily requirements is that in single family, the parking is based on the number of units. However, in multifamily, the parking is based on the number of bedrooms. As you can see, for efficiency unit, it's 1.25. For 1-bedroom units, it's 1.33. For 2-bedroom units is 1.6, and 3-bedroom or more bedrooms, it's 2 parking spaces per unit. Here, what you can see is that detached single family units. So this is data collected from census, and you can see from year 2015 to 2019, what are the different types of housing that are available. And you can see that the single family homes are in, the numbers are pretty high for single family homes as compared to the attached units, duplexes, 3 or 4 units on a property, and then the number increases as we go up to 20 units or more. But in comparison, when you compare, there is higher demand for the single unit lots. Let's imagine if every unit of these single family units, they're allowed, based on a certain size requirement, if they're allowed to add an additional unit, that will be so much increase in the number of housing units that will be available in the market. So this information I wanted to share to see how much gap there is. So based on the staff analysis, here is some preliminary ideas that we need committee's feedback on. And currently, a single family lot can have up to 2 units, like we discussed. Staff believes that increasing the number of units would help address the goal we're trying to achieve. But what should be the number of units on a lot? Should we allow more than 2 units? And how many maximum should it be? And what could be the benefits or challenges? So really, we're looking for the committee members to think about this and give us feedback, or what are the benefits and challenges that you think if we change the maximum number of units on a lot. The current off-street requirements, like you saw, for secondary unit, there is 1 additional parking space required. And the question for the committee is, should that requirement be changed? And if so, how should it be changed? We saw that anything more than 2 units on a lot is considered multifamily. Now, based on the current requirements, adding a unit changes it into adding 1 unit to a unit to a lot that already has duplex, converts it into multifamily, and then the requirements become more stringent. The multifamily requirements make it infeasible for somebody to add that additional unit. So we also want the committee to consider what should be the requirements for multifamily. While you think about these questions, let me share some pictures with you of developments built prior to 1999 with more than 3 units, more than 2 units on a lot. So let me go through, and here is some combinations we are talking about. There could be different combinations of how you could achieve more than 2 units. It could be 3, it could be 4, but I just want to share some pictures of what they could look like. So first example, here is a lot that has a duplex with a detached unit in the back. The building square footage is 3,400. And I'm sharing what the density and the FAR information currently, as the development is built, I'm sharing what the information about the property is. And this will help us eventually talk about what kind of density or floor area ratio requirements we may come up with. For today, it's just with the pictures, we want to communicate to you what is possible if we change the recommendations. Change the requirements. Next slide. Hold on, sorry. I think the presentation is going faster than me. Yes, thank you. This is a triplex, again, 3 units on a lot. And you can see that in this particular development, mostly the parking is along the street. And there is a lot of room for parking also in the back of the unit. Next picture. This is a property with a total of 4 units on a lot. It's a triplex in the front and a detached unit in the back. And you can see there is room for parking on the side of the main building. Next slide. It shows 1 lot again with 2 units, but here the combination is it's a duplex with 2 detached units. So in total, structures wise, there is only 3 structures, but it's a total of 4 units. And you can see there is room in the front for parking, and also there is room for parking behind the main building. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one. This is a lot with 2 duplexes. So each duplex, obviously, duplex contains 2 units. And there is room for, again, there is on-street parking, and also the secondary unit, the second duplex in the back also has driveway parking on the driveway, and also it has a garage underneath, carport underneath. The next example is a 4-plex. You can see that the units are all together in 1 unit, and you can see that there is room for parking in the back. In the next example, this property has all 4 units detached. So this is also a possibility that all the units could be detached. And in this particular example, the units are smaller. They are 460 square feet each. And there is room for parking within the lot itself, in between the both sets of units. So this is also an opportunity, also an idea how the property could be developed with more units on a lot. And the next slide, here is an example of different housing types side by side. All of the lots in this example are 5,000 square feet, and a couple of them got subdivided recently into 2,500 square feet lots. Let us look at some details in the next slide. So as you can see, the original lots, all of them are 5,000 square feet. So the 2 middle examples, you can see that the first, I'm not sure if I'm pointing it, but the first building area with 2634 square feet built in 1932, you see that the density is 34.8 because it is a 4-plex. Right next to it, you can see an attached duplex with a density of 17.4. And I'm providing information about what the density is and what the parking is looking like and where the parking is provided. And I also want the committee members to perceive how much of ground coverage there is. In the bottom right and left, you can see towards the left, you see the detached single family townhome looking structures with the density of, again, 17.4. Just like the attached units, the density is, because it is based on the number of units, the density is the same, but you can see the difference in the height of the structure and how much of the area is built. And towards the rightmost right corner, you can see that this is a shared driveway development with 3 units, and the density is 26 dwelling units per acre. So I want to pause here and wait for the committee members to pour in their ideas, and we will stay on this slide. Thank you so much, and we are ready for questions or comments, suggestions.
Thank you, Ms. Mandy. I don't see any hands raised. Am I missing any raised?
Yes, Mike Disberger's first, then Ron, I'm assuming that's Ron Lindsay is second.
Okay, Mike?
First of all, I like this is, you guys did a good job finding the different styles that are going on in Houston. The number 1 item is not requiring the extra parking spot for these detached garages. That just kills them. The areas where these are occurring in, I can see by your pictures even, when you have a detached garage, there is parking in the street. You can have some rules saying you have to have 22 feet of curb or open ditch to park along the road. But this would greatly enhance the number of secondary units in the city. I know the heights, there was a lot of this going on for a while, then we've had some issues with the alleyways lately. But this is number 1. This has prevented so many people to have a mother-in-law suite, rent it out to somebody at a very affordable price versus a regular home. This would make the housing stock in Houston increase. But the parking is a killer. If you have that one parking place, you have to have, you got to widen your driveway or do something crazy. And then in the heights, it's very difficult to do that. So I would greatly support that. I don't think anybody would be against that too much. Again, you can keep the square footage under 900 square feet if you like, because these are, what really happens is you have a 2-car garage normally and about 450, 500 square feet above. And you can get a kitchenette in there, a bathroom, a closet, and a pretty big bedroom family area. And I've built a bunch of these in the past, so I think it's a good idea. So the second one is, I think you ought to let the number of units per lot go up to 4. It's not something everyone's going to do, but it will allow for, again, smaller units. That's how you're going to get affordable homes, is to be able to build smaller units on expensive property. All this property inside the city seems to be getting really, really expensive, and so you want to get as much on the property as you can. So those 2 ideas, I agree with. Some of the other ones I'll let other people comment on, and I may come back. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mike. We appreciate that. Ron Lindsay?
So I'm looking at the picture of the duplexes to the right of the main slide, and thinking back on walkable places and how we were most concerned about how little on-street parking was left and how disruptive it was to have all these driveways crossing the sidewalk. So there needs to be some way to deal with this, and maybe it is reducing the amount of parking required for these subdivisions, though the cars are still going to be there, so they're not going away. I think the idea that somehow if you don't have parking provided, the cars just don't exist is not true in Houston. So I'm concerned about that image as being something we would even consider trying to promote, since it is against walkable places.
Committee member, may I? Madam Chair, may I?
Yes.
These are developments that are allowed today. So the image is trying to show what is allowed in the ordinance. All of these structures were built in compliance with the current regulations at the time when they were built. So it's not that we're wanting to encourage one over the other, but what is the possibility and what we could achieve if we change the regulations, and how are the different housing types looking when they are put right next to each other, is what this is trying to communicate. But I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Savita. Tammy, do we have other hands raised?
Yes, ma'am. Kirby Lou and then John Blunt after that.
Great. Kirby?
Yes. Savita, this is a question for you, which is, if you look at the aerial view, it seems like all of there's sort of 3 clusters on the left side have a front yard or street line setback, whereas the one on the right, which is kind of a cluster of 3 or 4 townhouses, has a much smaller setback. And one question I had was how that happened. And then secondly, I agree with Mr. Lindsay's comment that, just by reducing the parking requirement, it doesn't change the fact that, from a practical standpoint, people in Houston need cars to drive around. And so it's not going to sort of, make the cars just disappear. And the reason I ask about the setbacks is because if you allow the housing footprint to move closer to the street, it does also allow there to be more parking in the rear and, create space for that kind of thing. So I just wanted to ask really about how come the setbacks on these 3 are so much further back than this sort of cluster on the right on the 3 over there, and also to suggest that, removing those setbacks may actually make it more possible to park things in the rear. And then, sorry, one other thing I wanted to mention is I also saw that from last week, there was some discussion about the form of the building mass being a primary focus thing. And I also think that that's also very interesting as well. But I think there's also things like different types of parking technologies now where there's like parking lifts that allow you to stack cars within a single parking spot, things like that. So just sort of, thinking about the fact that there's changes to the way that we park cars in the future and not sort of set a datum right now that's going to prevent us from adopting those technologies to allow greater parking density.
Thank you, committee member, for those comments. To address your question, all the other three structures to the buildings to the left versus the shared driveway development to the left, your question was, why are other buildings further than the street and the shared driveway development is closer? So that pertains to the building line requirement, like you pointed out. In order to encourage developers to do shared driveway development, the ordinance required when the shared driveway concept was introduced, the building line was reduced to up to 5 feet. To encourage one driveway instead of 2 or 3 different driveways taking up the entire pedestrian realms and the public street. So that's why the buildings are built closer when it's a shared driveway versus these other buildings, they have anywhere from 17 feet, 10 feet building line, 17 feet garage building line, and there could be deed restrictions or other restrictions that could have larger building lines like 20 feet or 25 feet. But the standard is 1017 for regular buildings and 5 feet for shared driveways.
Thank you for clarifying that, Savita. Thanks for your comments, Ron. Kirby, excuse me. Next is John Blunt.
Yeah, the first question I have is the city adopted Appendix Q of the IRC? Because that allows for a lot smaller home to be built, which would, typically what we're seeing here is built to the current building code. The International Building Code has been revised to allow smaller homes in Appendix Q, and as I understand it, the city hadn't adopted it. If they would do that, that would be a lot more flexibility on putting multiple homes in here and would resolve some of these driveway situations we're discussing.
Savita,
yes.
I don't know if you can answer that or.
So no, I cannot answer the building, the IRC residential code question. But what I wanted to say is we will eventually discuss the access to the properties. So today, the question, Devin, can we please go to the question slide, please? I think it's before the pictures. So today's question really is, currently the ordinance says 2 units on a lot, but how many should we allow? Should it be 3, 4, 5, 6? How many? And then for parking requirements, all the way in the, let me give you the slide number.
And Savita, that's why I was asking the question, because, developers are constrained by the code. If the city hadn't adopted Appendix Q, there's a minimum size house they have to build based on the code. And if they adopt Appendix Q, it automatically goes down to 35 square foot, by the way, as opposed to the current code, which is substantially more to that.
If I may, Michael Howard is on the line from Houston Public Works, should be able to answer that question.
Thank you, Tim.
Great, thank you.
Yes, we have currently proposed a Houston amendment to incorporate the Appendix Q from the 2018 IRC into the 2015 IRC, which is being considered for adoption here in the next couple of months.
Okay, that's helpful. I think it's very important to this topic, because if you can build smaller homes, they become more affordable, and you can put more of them on a lot, and you can have less issues with parking.
Right, and we agree. And so that'll be part of our new IRC as soon as it gets adopted. We're supposed to go to TTI sometime, I think, first week of August, and then hopefully go straight to council after that.
Savita, this is Margaret Wallace Brown. Can I ask another question?
Yes, please.
John, I think that point is important, but I also want to note that because our parking rules are established by basically bedrooms per unit, we would still have the parking problem that people have spoken about. If we put more small units on a lot, you're still required the amount of parking.
Well, if you follow the code, they don't require bedrooms. They have lofts and they're not counted as a bedroom in the Appendix Q. So theoretically, you might not have to have any parking, by the way, depending on how you interpret the code.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that insight.
That is interesting. So I guess we still, that's a great point, John, and thanks for bringing that up. And I appreciate Ms. Howard from Public Works telling us where we are with that. So I guess the question still remains, what is the maximum number of units that we think should be allowed on lots? And let's kind of set parking aside for a minute. Let's do this one by one. Is it 3 units? Is it 4 units? Is it 8 units? And, you know, let's get some input from as many committee members as we can.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Sonny
sir.
Garza.
Go ahead, Sonny.
Just to back up what you were just saying, we've been talking about new development, which is great, and I love all that input. But I think one of the things that we really want to touch on right now is if you're looking at inner city infill development, which is currently hamstringed by the current ordinance. If you have a duplex and you add a garage apartment to the rear, you basically have to pave over your front yard because of the parking requirement. So without giving my opinion here so much as co-chair, the idea is we want to discuss, if you're thinking about infill in the city, what do we want to look at? A maximum of 3 units? Is that a duplex with a garage apartment? Is it 4 units, like a triplex in a garage? That will considerably, you know, you could add that, you could. So I think that we want to go in this direction for right now and get some ideas of what your opinion is, committee, on, you know, inner city infill, so that we can add rental units and mother-in-law units and that sort of thing that will allow for, you know, lower priced housing. So, you know, just wanted to reiterate what Lisa said and open the floor.
Thank you, Sonny.
Thank you.
Mr. Friedman has his hand raised.
Yes, Mr. Friedman.
We're building exactly the type of lots that Co-Chair Garza was just talking about, and are building on those type of lots. And I really think that a 4 unit, an increase to 4 units is the way to go, and also reducing the parking so we can kind of have an actual true yard and not increase the impervious cover on all of our properties to accommodate for extra parking. There's also something, looking at those pictures, I kind of was thinking about. Right now we have incentives on using a common driveway on a single lot. You can move the setback up to 5 feet, and that allows for parking in the rear or whatever. But if you do a common driveway between two different lot owners, or on 2 different lots, that triggers detention requirements. And if you're really trying to change the streetscape, if you are allowing multiple lots to use the same driveway, that is a way to really make a big impact, in my opinion.
That's great input. And that's something, I guess, Savita, that we'd have to work with Public Works on to get some input on, since it would, you know, trigger the detention. But that is something that you guys could talk with the technical advisory group about and get their input on.
Sure,
That's a
ma'am.
great idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Tammy, do we have other hands raised?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Mahmood.
Ms. Mahmood.
Good afternoon, everyone. I agree with the 4 units and with the reduction in parking. I think if we can still support green space and try to encourage other modes of transportation, like the other speakers have said, this might not be the way to do it in terms of encouraging other modes of transportation, but it's a way of really increasing the density and allowing for some affordable housing inside the city, but also preserving our green space. And so I think if we can accommodate all of those, and you know, and not moving forward, how that type of development would be encouraged, I don't know, but some of the investment into our sidewalks so that people really sort of start walking to places and really using our sidewalk network and our bikeway network that is growing as an additional mode of transportation. I think we're going in the right direction.
Great, thank you. Tammy,
So Mr. Lindsay is next, and then Ms. Escobar.
okay. Ron?
So in terms of the 4 units per lot, I think that makes sense. I'm still a bit troubled by doing away with parking. If it's a smaller unit, 400 or 500 square feet, I could see you saying, well, no parking is required for that. But when you get up to 900 square feet, you're talking about somebody's probably going to have a car, and it's going to have to go somewhere. So the city needs to think about how they're going to provide substantial off-street parking if they allow this change. I also agree with the previous speaker about the sidewalks. We need to have a sidewalk network. Right now, we did a lot of work on that, walkable places, and then there's been, in my opinion, some backsliding on that. The fact that a sidewalk doesn't currently go anywhere is not relevant to me. Eventually it will, but if you just never say, well, it doesn't go over today, so therefore we shouldn't have it, means you never get a sidewalk network. So if any kind of change like this needs to be tied in with strengthening the sidewalk network.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Okay, Ms. Escobar?
Yes, I'd like to also agree with the 4 units in Freedmanstown in particular. Quite a few of our affordable housing developments are duplexes, fourplexes, and things of that nature, with street parking as their only form of parking right now. And so we would support kind of this increased density and that 4 maximum as opposed to 2 or 3.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ms. Williamson, do we have other hands raised?
Not at this moment.
Okay. How about let's hear from some of the folks we haven't heard from yet, because this is a really important issue. We need to have as much food for thought as possible. So I'd like to ask you to raise your hand if you haven't spoken and speak. Please don't make me call on you. And those of you that know me know that I will call on you.
Lisa, I know you'll call on me.
Yes, I will, Megan. You're going to be one of my first. Go ahead, Megan.
No, I think that I'm really trying to wrap my head around the parking, and this is from someone whose first 10 years in Houston lived in a 400 square foot carriage house in Montrose, and I had a car, and it was, I needed it at the time, and so I don't know if the size, if the size and the parking space relate, because if you need the transportation, you need it, and if you can only afford a small house, you can only afford or a small rental unit, that's what you can afford. So just trying to really figure out how with 4 units you can fit the parking that you need, but I'm a big proponent of the idea, just trying to really wrap myself around the parking.
Right. I mean, that is a difficult one. But, there are considerations, and some folks have brought things up like, reducing front setbacks maybe a little bit if we put parking in the back. And so there may be some ways that the Technical Advisory Committee can help us come up with that would help us work on that. Because I worry about that as well. Because you're right. I've lived in small units and I needed a car. So that is a consideration. But thanks for your comments.
Sure.
How about others that haven't spoken up? Are they on there yet, Ms. Williamson?
Meg Lusto has her hand raised.
Ms.
And then
Lusto.
Sherry Smith.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to touch on something that an earlier speaker said about what curb cuts are doing to on-street parking. And I just want to voice support for on-street parking. I think that is a valuable public commodity that benefits everyone in the area. It reduces development costs and makes housing more affordable. It provides flexibility in terms of, having visitors over. When we allow numerous curb cuts, and I used to live in Montrose, and there were very few on-street parking spaces for those of us that didn't have off-street parking because all of the townhouses had eaten up all the curbs. And so I don't know how to create this formula, but perhaps there's a formula where developers get points, or there's some sort of factor about preserving sufficient curb space to allow for on-street parking, and that becoming a component of how decisions are made about the amount of off-street parking that's required, allowed, permitted, or minimized.
Good point. Thank you.
Lisa, it's Megan again. Just thinking about what the last speaker said, wasn't that part of the 16-foot shared drive, getting the reduced building line?
Yes.
I mean, that was the developer incentive. You had the additional 10, well, yeah, even more, depending on the setback, but you could go up to a 5-foot setback, which allowed you to build more with only one curb cut.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Thank you. Let's see, Ms. Smith, I believe you were next.
Yes, I want to echo what everyone has talked about, and I'm sitting here looking out of the window in the 3rd Ward, and one of my concerns is, yes, if you've got 4 units and everything is on the street, I'm looking at streets that we're talking about passability, and that if you've got curb parking on street parking on both sides, then what are you leaving with the street? As far as its width and cars coming on, going on both sides of the street. And so just want to throw that out there. I do like the idea of minimizing or increasing street parking. I like the walkability of it. I just want to look at kind of the use of the street itself and to throw that out also for consideration.
Thank you for those comments. Ms. Williamson, do we have others with their
No
hands?
other hands raised, so it's up to you to call on them.
Okay, well, let's see. Let me go through my list. Sean Masick, we haven't heard from you.
No, I've been listening, and so far, most of this has been sounding pretty good to me.
Okay. Any additional, suggestions on how to do parking or anything like that? Not right off the top of your head.
No.
Don't you love to be called on when you aren't ready?
Yep.
Right. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Sean.
Sonny Garza.
Sonny, go ahead.
Was it Mr. Friedman that was talking about parking? Actually, he was talking about the shared driveways and how that set up a triggered detention requirements. And so we're talking really about 2 different things here. We're talking about, like I said, infill and new development. Right. So I would like to know from our builders on this panel, what more specifically, and you've already discussed them, in passing, what specifically could be done to change the ordinance to make it easier for you to build multifamily units on a single lot that are more like rental versus cutting the lot up into townhouses? What incentives would you need from the city to make that, economically feasible? So could our developers talk a little bit about that?
Good question. Thank you.
Megan Siegler and then Mike Dishberger.
Okay, go ahead, Megan.
Well, but I guess I'm asking a question, maybe not answering Sonny's, but to me, we're talking about, what triggers, this isn't a replot situation, right? This is how many units you're allowed to build on one lot. So if you're not replatting, why would it trigger the detention requirement?
If I may answer that, I think Mr. Friedman talked about shared driveways in an effort to get more open space, and that when you share it across a boundary line, that would trigger detention. Right. Also, going from 3 units or 2 units to 3 units also makes you now commercial versus residential. Right. And so what I'm trying to figure out and what we want to help staff figure out is, can we get the roadblocks that are preclude us from having more housing, both inner and out of the loop, so to speak, new plus redeveloped housing? What are the onerous things that are currently in the ordinance, according to you, that might be changed or tweaked to make it easier to build, 4 units on a single lot, or new units with a shared driveway? That's the sort of thing I'm talking about, Megan. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Sonny.
Next
Okay.
is Mr. Dishberger.
Mike.
Well, thanks, Sonny, for taking away what I was going to say, but I'll tell you one of the biggest things that has occurred this year is the detention. And it's specifically noted shared driveways. It was never, they had some stuff in before, but now if you have a shared driveway, it triggers detention. So that answers Megan's question too. And once you get into detention with these rates, and they're quadruple what they were before, it was 0.2, now it's 0.8, 0.85. It's just crazy. And then to top it off, you guys want parking. So if I want to put 4 units on there, I need 8 parking spaces, possibly, which is all concrete, which is even more detention. And detention is easier to do, believe it or not, with curb and gutter streets because the storm sewer lines are down deep in the road. I can tie into that. But open ditch, you only have about 2 feet of depth you can dig into your yard to drain it away because it's open ditch. And so the 2 items are, they really need to revisit this detention. I think it's being talked about at the city somewhat, but they really, really need to talk about that and look at that shared driveway because it was totally redone. And the number of parking places. Hey, I live in the city too. We all want parking, but there's going to gotta be a trade-off. I think if you're building smaller units, you might find that there's 1 car per unit. It's not 2 because it's a smaller deal. A lot of people live in these 400, 500 square foot homes or these garage apartments. It's a single person. It's not 2 people that are driving both cars. I can't say we can by ordinance fix that. But those are the 2 big items. I know the duplex, the 4 units, there's a builder who's building a sunny side on some 50, 60 foot wide lots. And he's had difficulties with the duplexes now because of the shared driveway requirement. And he's limited to 2 homes per lot. And he got into just a quagmire with the permitting department and kind of swore he'll never do it again because it just became very, very complex to get a shared driveway to the back unit to do that. And he was trying to provide some lower cost housing in that particular part of the city. So that's one of our builders. So those are things I hear from my builders.
And I appreciate those comments, Mike. And one other thing you brought up when you were talking about open ditches, when staff and technical advisory are together, one of the considerations is we need more space when we develop on open ditch because our utilities have to be back behind that ditch. So you couldn't do a trade-off of a closer setback in lieu of, all these driveway cuts. So that needs to be considered as well because there's no room for utilities at that point. So anyhow, just food for thought. Ms. Williamson, do we have anyone else with their hand
Yes,
up?
Mr. Friedman, then Ms. Mahmood, then John Blunt.
Okay, Mr. Friedman?
Thank you. I think everybody kind of hit most of the points I wanted to talk about, the common driveway, but as incentives wise, I think having the maximum per lot go up to 4 units would be a huge incentive. I think reducing the parking would be a huge incentive. Being able to bring those properties forward, I think setbacks would also be helpful, especially if we're doing, say, 3 units on a lot. If we could put a shared driveway going back behind the house, that would be a big help. And then looking into some kind of help for affordable housing when it comes to multifamily on a single lot. So right now we have an impact fee that gets waived for affordable housing under the medium housing price for a single family. But if you go to 2 or more, you cannot use that. And then really deciding what is affordable housing when it comes to ADUs. Is there a certain dollar figure that you would use, or would you do a total value based off the single family home plus the ADUs? But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Those are definitely good points. I refreshed my memory by reading the minutes again from last meeting, and you made some really good points in there, and I know staff will take all of that into consideration as they discuss. Ms. Mahmood?
I wanted to bring something up that I think is relevant to this conversation that we had discussed maybe in one of our first meetings. And it is maybe the possibility of looking at providing reduced parking based on the distance that you are from a transit, so bus or rail or even bikeways, comfortable bikeways, and looking at that as something where we really start, sort of back into the TOD ordinance in a way, but in a different way, not within the TOD ordinance, but looking at that as a metric that we could apply for those who are developing and looking at that reduced parking. I mean, it's a sort of like a big assumption to make, but it makes sense if we're trying to encourage people not, if there's not sufficient right of way for parking, et cetera, but that's a possibility that we could start looking at tying those things together in terms of parking and transit and biking, to start looking at that. And I think Robin, I will give this credit to Robin, who was on the call from TEI, and she'd mentioned had we brought that idea up in this committee, and we had, and so I just wanted to bring it back forward. But also, I think she might, I don't know if she's gonna, I don't want to put her on the spot, but she might want to provide some comments. She's not on the committee, but providing some comments regarding what she's familiar with in terms of the Montrose areas and other areas that have provided a parking district, and how that is working for the city, and how we can maybe use that model citywide.
Great, thank you for that. And then hopefully she'll sign up to speak during public comments, because we would like to hear what she has to say. Let's see, John Blunt.
Yeah, I did want to say that I was in favor of the 4 and reducing the parking. And the other comment people made is detention. And I would encourage the city to consider adopting the county's green infrastructure guidelines, which would significantly reduce the detention required in these affordable housing and other areas by a magnitude of multiple times. We've been asking for years for the city to embrace green infrastructure. We're hoping you will.
Great, thank you, John. Appreciate it. Ms. Williamson, any other hands?
No, ma'am.
Okay, for those committee members that maybe
Megan Siegler.
that I've overlooked, you got away without it this time. But any other?
Megan Siegler just raised her hand.
Megan?
Yes, I think I just need a little more explanation on if the four units per lot, and I'm going back to like committee from maybe 18 years ago, when we came up with the 24 units per acre based on a 50 by 100 foot lot. So and that, I think at the time we said that was a pretty typical lot size for Houston, 50 by 100, basing that on some of our inner city areas. So if we went to the 4 units, we're recommending then that we would be changing the density in chapter 42. Is it?
Madam Chair, can I answer that?
Go
please?
ahead, Ms. Bandy.
Thank you, committee member. That is a good point that you brought up. So as we saw in the examples, density, what it does is it helps people to build the maximum size, because density is based on the number of units and it doesn't have anything to do with the square footage. So no matter you're building 2 small units or 2 large units, the density will be the same. So the density requirements help somebody to go up to the maximum size allowed, maximum size of the unit allowed. And based on the residential study recommendations, it was recommended that instead we may want to use the lot coverage and massing, like floor area ratio type of factors instead of the density factors. So during the technical advisory group, we will be considering and looking at if that is the right thing to do. And if it is, then what should be the floor area ratio for these kind of developments? Right now, we are only talking about how many units, but once we figure out how many units, then we will talk about should it be density or should it be FAR, or should it be coverage, certain percentage of coverage. So those will be discussed with the TAG group.
Okay, thank you. Sorry if you had mentioned that earlier, I'm sorry. It now makes sense.
Yeah,
Thank
you don't have to apologize. This can all be very confusing and, we've talked about this at various points throughout our meetings. So, I appreciate the question. Tammy, do we have anyone else signed up?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone's comments. Savita, I think we have, good direction, on this topic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we will move on to the next item. Give me a second to get back to the slides. So the next item is to discuss the details and research about accessory dwelling units, also called secondary dwelling units. So there is an opportunity to do detached units, or there is opportunity to do attached units, or a combination. ADUs, when you refer to ADU, the term itself could mean accessory dwelling unit, could mean attached or detached. But in Houston, when it is attached, there is no size limit of how much that attached unit could be, that second unit. They could be both the same size, the main and the secondary. But when it is detached, there is a requirement of 900 square feet. And I request Lindy Morris to present the details she collected from other cities and information that she wanted to share. She's a very hardworking staff member we have, and she is very analytical in her presentation. So thank you so much, Lindy, for working on this.
Thanks. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Lindy Morris. As previously mentioned, an accessory dwelling unit, or ADU, is an independent residential dwelling unit located on the same lot as a single-family home. And like Suvita just mentioned, the current City of Houston Code of Ordinances does not restrict the size of attached ADUs. It allows for detached ADUs under the single-family residential definition, which states that a lot with one dwelling unit and a detached secondary dwelling unit of not more than 900 square feet also shall be considered single-family residential. So that 900 square feet is the main restriction. Staff researched the requirements for detached ADUs in other U.S. cities in terms of how the size is regulated. San Antonio allows for a maximum size of 800 square feet in residential zoning districts, except for the residential estate zoning district of lots greater than 1 acre, on which ADUs can be built up to 1,200 square feet. Austin, Texas allows for detached ADUs up to 1,100 square feet, or 0.15 floor area ratio, as long as the lots are greater than 5,750 square feet. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, they allow for detached ADUs with a maximum size between 1,300 and 1,600 square feet. And that is depending on the size of the lot and the size of the principal dwelling unit. So it's a lot larger than what we typically see. Next slide. In Sacramento, California, they allow for detached ADUs up to 1,200 square feet. And they also allow different combinations of multi-unit dwellings on a lot. A maximum of 2 ADUs is permitted for a combined total not to exceed 1,200 square feet. Based on the research that was presented in the previous meeting, we have established that there is a growing demand for more rental housing units. And increasing the maximum ADU size could allow for the availability of larger rental units for moderate income families. I will now invite Lynn Henson to share her research on the current inventory of detached ADUs within Houston to show what is actually being built. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy. Next slide, please. In order to get an understanding of what accessory dwelling units look like in the city of Houston, we look to HCAD data. That's the Harris County Appraisal District data. This is our best source, and we use this to extract and identify what we're calling ADUs. But Harris County Appraisal District has 2 codes, and that is frame detached garage with living area above, and the second code is brick or stone detached garage with living. We understand that this data may not capture all ADUs in Houston, but it gives us a good starting point to look at background and to understand what's in Houston. These are some of the highlights that came out of the research. We found 3,604 parcels that have ADUs or garage apartments. The median size of the units is 530 square feet. The smallest was 168 square feet and the largest was 2,940 square feet. Keep in mind that this data does not identify whether units are occupied, unoccupied, rental, for lease, man cave, or she shed, but it does describe the building for HCAP purposes to help determine property value. Looking at the bar chart on the right, you can see that about half of all of these units are within the size of 450 square feet to about 600 square feet. The data indicated that 7% were actually larger than 900 square feet, and 5% are on parcels that are less than 3,500 square feet. This map gives you an idea of where ADUs are in the city of Houston. Council District C has 40% of the units. If you look at the city by super neighborhoods, 43% of units are in just 3 super neighborhoods. The Greater Heights at 22%, Afton Oaks, River Oaks at 13%, and University Place at 8%. Looking at how close units are to some of the major transit, other mobile options, 11% are within a half a mile of a metro rail station. The data indicated that the average total value by parcels is about $900,000. Keep in mind that the total market value includes the land value, the value of all structures on the property, and any amenities. The average lot size was 11,480 square feet. This could indicate that the more affluent can afford to build an ADU. And the planning department is looking into ways to educate and encourage ADU development at all income levels. There is a gentleman out of Portland, Oregon, Cole Peterson, who is an ADU advocate, researcher, educator, developer. He's written a book, Backdoor Revolution, The Definitive Guide to ADU Development. I've pulled out a few points from his research. One, there is no average construction price. It's really difficult to try to pinpoint an average because of the different variables. Construction costs may include design costs, and that could be a simple design or something that's very elaborate, so giving way to a range of design costs, permitting costs, utility connection fees, and whether or not the homeowner actually put any sweat equity into the construction. It also is dependent on whether or not ADU construction is new, whether or not it's remodeled, if it's detached or attached, if it's above the garage or below the building in a basement, and the site conditions. In Houston, site conditions are pretty flat. In other areas, for example, in mountainous or hilly areas, that could add to the construction costs in various ways. From an economic point of view, Cole Peterson states that it makes sense to build the ADU up to the largest allowable size, since there's only a marginal increase in additional square footage. So for example, if the city of Houston were to increase or remove its maximum ADU size, building from 900 to 1,200, for example, square feet would just include a marginally more expensive unit. But if you look at if you remember the slide that showed the sizes, in Houston, the naturally occurring average size is somewhere around 550 square feet for an ADU. This is the end of the report. I'd like to pause here to see if there are any questions. Otherwise, I want to expand this opportunity for there to be more questions. Looking specifically at the maximum size for an ADU. And again, currently the single family lot may have either an attached duplex of equal size or a primary housing unit with an additional detached unit that does not exceed 900 square feet. What do you see as benefits or challenges to increasing the maximum size of an ADU? And I want to pause here for comments from committee members or questions.
Thank you, Lynn. I actually have a question. I'm not a builder, so I don't know the answer, but I'd like to understand. Is it right? Is it correct that if you do a detached garage apartment, let's say, that you can't have kitchen facilities or you can only have minimal facilities? Do you know what those restrictions are?
You can have a kitchen, a bath in an ADU unit. But if Savita, if you have more information and can help answer that question, I'd appreciate it.
The information you gave, Lynn, is correct. Yes, they can have kitchen, bath. Also, the impact fee calculation wise, based upon if there is a washer dryer, there is a different amount of impact fee. But all of those are allowed. It's a completely separate another unit, another single family unit. In order to not, and this is where I would request Hector Rodriguez to please pitch in, is sometimes because there is this additional parking requirement when it is a full-blown home, to avoid providing that, I think there is a workaround that some property owners do, that there is no kitchen and don't provide the parking. But I would call upon Hector Rodriguez, please.
Hector Rodriguez, Planning Department. Yes, a lot of people that develop like Lynn said, a kind of like an ADU, but it's really like a game room. We asked them not to provide a kitchen or a bathroom, a complete bathroom with a tub or shower, and that is not considered a complete dwelling unit. A complete dwelling unit has to have facilities for sleeping, bathing, and obviously cooking. If you're missing one, then it's not an ADU.
Great, thank you. I knew I'd heard something about it. I just wanted to make sure I understood. Thank you, Hector. So Ms. Williamson, it looks like we have some hands up.
Yes, so far there's 4. So first, Mr. Lindsay, then Mr. Friedman.
Okay, Mr. Lindsay?
Listening to your explanation of how you generated the numbers of ADUs, and if I understood correctly, you found that a large part of them were in areas with very large lots. I don't think that is meaningful information for us. You need to take those units out because those are not meant to be rented. In those larger neighborhoods, there can be deed restrictions against rental property. In all likelihood, those are built for people who work for the owners of the main house, or maybe they have a child that comes in now and then, but that's not a dwelling unit that would otherwise be on the market, and it's probably distorting your size ratios.
Yes, thank you for that comment. We do realize that this data does not help us characterize the garage apartment units any more than simply those 2 codes that were provided by HCAD. So we would need to find a way in order to further categorize the units and to be able to do more research in that along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you.
And as a follow-up, I spent some time with a large nonprofit here in Houston, and they owned a lot of residential properties, including garage apartments. There was, I think, lack of city oversight on the quality of maintenance of those. And so as you start to encourage these ADUs, especially garage apartments, somehow the city's going to have to figure out how to actually make sure those are safe to be in. Oftentimes they don't get looked at all. I mean, the city has a system in place to inspect apartments now and then, even that's way underfunded, but they don't inspect these units. And as you try to increase them, you're going to have more and more problems because oftentimes the owners really don't understand how to maintain them, and they don't. And they deteriorate where they're literally not safe to walk into.
Thank you for that, Ron. That is an important note. Mr. Friedman?
Thank you for the information. I think it's really helpful. We've gone through this same thought process when it came to building homes. We're trying to do affordable homes. We started off looking at trying to do 2-bedroom, 1-bath homes. We figured that would be the most affordable. But because your major costs really are the kitchens and the bathrooms, it's not that much more expensive to turn that into a 3-bedroom, 1-bath or so on. So increasing the minimum size of the ADU, I never really thought of it that way, but that's true. You're already paying to put in a full kitchen, full bath, and then washer and dryer facilities. Increasing that size so you could suit a larger family, I think is a good idea. I think especially when you're trying to do affordability, that's where once you've built it, you can't. It's more difficult to build on in the future, especially if you're talking about above a garage or some other type of construction that'd be limited. So I do like the idea of increasing the maximum size. I'm not sure what that size should be, but I do think that is a good idea. I kind of follow up on the other speaker just a second ago. I didn't think about this, but there are areas where we do have deed restrictions on multifamily. Basically, the deeds say you can only have a single family on those properties. So I don't know if there is a workaround, and that's something maybe legal could be consulted on, because that could be an issue in some neighborhoods going forward.
Great, thank you. Ms. Williamson, the next two.
Ms. Siegler?
Okay, Megan?
Can someone possibly from the city explain how utilities work? I mean, with multiple units on the property and it belonging to the same owner, is there one water tap into the city main line? Are there 3? Just something I'm trying to wrap myself around how that works, as if the units do get bigger and if we would decide to increase the amount of units allowed.
Savita, you may ask if Luis Villasana is here. Yes, Mr. Luis Villasana is on the call, I thought. Let me check.
I thought I saw his name, but I don't see it on there now.
We will provide the information in the next meeting. I noted down the question that how the utilities work out when there is additional units is a very important aspect to understand before we make a recommendation. So point noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Ms. Williamson, do you have
Andy
others?
Tees.
Hello,
Andy Tees.
Okay, Andy?
I just wanted to mention on the inspection issue that somebody brought up, the way the Houston Habitability Ordinance works, it's considered multifamily if it's 3 units or up. So if it was 3 units on a lot, or if it was 4 units on a lot, they would have to register as a multifamily residential building, and they would be subject to the Habitability Inspection Act. If it's a duplex or if it's a single family rent house, they are not subject to that ordinance. So one of the things that you would probably want to think about is that the right place to draw that line? Do you want the city to get into the rent house inspection business? If so, that's a pretty huge thing to take on. If not, what about duplexes? Or do you just want to leave it at 3 and 4? But there is there isn't an ordinance in place to inspect threeplexes and fourplexes if that's what you end up doing on a lot.
Great, thank you, Andy.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question to Mr. Tees?
Absolutely.
Mr. Tees, you mentioned that whenever it's more than 2 units, it's considered multifamily. So is there a specific definition to, is that the definition to account for that Houston habitability ordinance, or are triplexes and quadruplexes okay to do? And when it is a detached unit, that's when it becomes multifamily. I'm trying to understand what kind of definition there is to qualify for this, to be part of the Houston habitability portion.
I will, I'll email the actual, I don't remember the actual definition. I just remember if it's 3 units or up, it's subject to that ordinance. If it's 2 units or if it's a single unit, it's not. But the way they define, and it's different in every ordinance. It's different in solid waste. It's different for the public safety ordinance. But for habitability, which is I think what you're talking about. Oh, and for the fire department, it's 10 units and up. To be multifamily, but for habitability, it's 3. But I'll email that definition to you.
Sure, thank you so much.
So, Madam Chair, Sonny Garza.
Yes, go ahead, Sonny.
Mr. Tees, if we if we designate 4 units as single family, would that still trigger that ordinance? If we call that single family, we would have to change that ordinance that you're speaking of as well to say 4 units as single family versus 1 or 2, correct?
You would need to go make a change to that ordinance to clarify, whether you did or did not want that.
Right. Yeah. So it could be that we've got a technical issue that could be handled basically with language and definitions, potentially.
Yeah, maybe so.
Cool. Cool. Also, Madam Chair, while I'm here, a question for staff that hasn't come up yet, but we talked about, I think it was Mr. Friedman talked about, deed restrictions hampering the construction of these units, but also we have the building line and minimum lot size ordinances are in place. I, as an inner city dweller, have a concern that if you can build that garage apartment, let's just say, what is going to prevent someone from turning that garage apartment into a 3-story apartment building, So I don't know if that's a question to be addressed here or maybe with the tag, but if you put the setback ordinance in place to kind of restrict what can be built in your neighborhood, and then someone builds a 3-story garage apartment, I think that's something that, if not to be discussed today, must be considered as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonny.
Sure, thank you. Will point noted.
Tammy, do we have anyone else signed?
Not any other committee members, no, ma'am.
Okay. So, Ms. Bandy, do you have any finishing up items before we go to public comments?
No, we were just trying to figure out if at all we probably will come back to the size. I think there are some questions to be answered as to how this additional dwelling unit could be accomplished in terms of utilities, in terms of maintenance. I think those are all significant. So we will come back to this discussion again. And I really appreciate all the comments we received today. Some homework to be done. So thank you for that. And I think we are ready for the next item on the agenda, which is homework activities by Lynn Hansen.
Thank you, Savita. The conversation and questions that have been brought up today were really great. Thank you again. We have a survey that will be available on letstalkhouston.org tomorrow morning, so that if any of the committee members have any other comments or questions that they would like to send to the planning department, we'll provide an opportunity for you to do that through letstalkhouston.org/livable places and look for the survey tab. The survey will also include locations around Houston that we encourage you to drive by and take a look at. These locations highlight different single-family configurations and ADUs as well. You can find the survey online with those locations. And also included on letstalkhouston.org is a new article. If you would like to see other examples of ADUs, you can navigate to letstalkhouston.org/livable places. And this is available to anyone in the city of Houston to look at, not just the committee members. And click on the articles tab. There you will find a link to buildinganadu.com. This site has numerous pictures of ADUs in various stages of construction, and you can examine creative design elements as well. The photos are arranged by category, including construction, conversion, interior design, exterior elements, and much more. So I encourage you to log on and take a look at that as you think about ADUs in Houston. And that is all. Thank you.
I would like to also ask all of the committee members, and for those who are participating on the call, encourage folks that in the city to get on this website, take a look, read through it, answer the surveys, provide comments, because we can only make this as good as the input that we get. So I'd encourage each of you to help staff out and try to get as many people to comment as possible and respond to the survey. So with that, Savita, we're going to go over to public comments. So
yes, ma'am. Just to say that we will continue the discussion on ADUs and answer some of the questions that were brought up today in the next meeting, which is not in July. We are skipping the July meeting, like you heard from our director. The next meeting will be on August 10th at 3 p.m. So with that, we are ready for public comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you, Savita. Appreciate it. So we're going to go to public comments. And I just want to remind everyone that each member of the public will have 2 minutes to speak. And I hope you've put your name into the chat. But when I call on you, if you could please state your name and then spell your last name for us. It's very important that we get that on the audio. So we appreciate that. Tammy, do I have anyone signed up through the chat?
You do, but I do not have that list.
Okay, who would have that list?
Madam Chair, I would have that list.
Okay.
This is Tamara Poe that is helping us with the public speakers today. Sorry, Madam Chair, I didn't put her name in there.
That's fine. Thank you. Go ahead, Tamara.
So first we have Tremaine Chapman, followed by a Carson.
Okay. Tremaine?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Could you please state your name and spell your last name for me?
Yes, I'm Tremaine Chapman, and it's spelled Tramaine. Last name is Chatman. And I'm a realtor. I deal more in land. But what we do notice in real estate is that, especially in the inner loop, you have a lot of developers. They have the capability of building 2- and 3-story single family homes on 6,000 square foot lots. They have the capabilities of building a lot of small homes, but what they're doing is they're building the garages on the bottom and then the living areas on the 2nd and 3rd floor. And this cut out a lot of room where they can actually build 2 or 3 homes on lots that maybe can accommodate one. One of the issues that we are having is that most of these homes do have 2-car garages, but the owners who buy these homes from the developers are investors, and they're leasing them out. And they're leasing them out to college students and young adults. And a lot of times it's more than 2 people living there. And a lot of times they have more than 2 cars. So some of them are parking in the streets. We're hearing stories where they're waking up and their mirrors are gone because they're parking in the street. It's hard to walk in the walk on the sidewalk because cars are parked in the over the sidewalks. So reducing the parking can cause a lot of problems. And not only that, you're pulling people like me who have a kid or families out of that area because we have nowhere to park. And there's no room for kids to do anything. So reducing the parking might complicate a lot of things. But that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your comments. Tamara, I believe you said the last name of our next speaker was Carson, but please correct me. I did not write it down.
I'm not sure if it's a last name or a first name. It was just Carson.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I see in the chat where someone by the name of Carson signed up. So
yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can now. Yes. Could you state your name and spell your last name, please?
Name is Carson Riggins. Last name is spelled Riggins.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
I just wanted to speak on public comment today. I am in favor. Excuse me, I'm echoing. I am in favor of reducing the parking requirement for the ADU. And I think one thing needs to be clear that reducing the parking minimum for an ADU doesn't mean a developer can't include parking if they choose. If we really want to develop affordable housing, the poorest Americans cannot afford vehicles. If we force the poorest Americans to have a parking spot and have to, the developer has to develop that and actually make that, then that's going to reduce the affordability of the housing for them. Like I said, though, if we reduce the minimum, that doesn't mean the developer can't include a parking spot if they so choose. A few other things I'd like to comment on. Someone had talked about how curb cuts reduce the on-street parking. The curb cut privatizes that parking for the homeowner. So you could have one parking spot there, but now you put a driveway, and now that parking is only for the homeowner. So I think shared driveways are a good way to maximize on-street parking and still have that off-street parking. Those are all the comments I had for today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Tamara, who do we have
Yes.
next?
Madam Chair, we have Mary Ross, followed by Benjamin Baharich.
Okay. Mary Ross, are you with us still?
Yes, I am. And thank you for allowing me to speak. I have to speak in opposition of the reducing the parking, because when you reduce parking and you force people to park on the street, you create, and someone else had mentioned that it creates a safety issue. When cars are parked on both sides of the street, you reduce the usable, I don't know what the right term is, but you reduce the usable space that vehicles can pass, especially emergency vehicles. And it is just not a safe situation. It kind of penalizes people who need affordable housing to be forced to park on the street when more and more developers go to developing properties that would force them to park their vehicles on the streets. Also, where am I? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I had another comment that it would penalize people needing affordable housing. It would penalize the very people you're trying to help, people needing affordable housing inside the city. And then with the newer built properties, most of them would be forced to park on the streets in an unsafe condition. Also, I have a question though, and that was that would this be allowed in deed restricted communities where the restrictions would not, if the restrictions would normally not allow this, how would that affect, this type of development? And I know that you probably can't answer me here, and you're welcome to send it to me.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ross. Savita, is that something that you could either answer or get her information and get back with her?
I can answer the deed restricted question. So anything that is within chapter 42 does not override the deed restrictions. So if there are some deed restrictions active currently that prohibit addition of a unit or anything else like building lines or lot sizes, nothing in the ordinance overrides that. So deed restrictions will prevail.
Okay. Had I used my 2 minutes, because I did have a question that I couldn't find, and that's
I didn't hear the bell. Go ahead and ask it real quick, please.
Okay, real quick. Thank you. Developing a development with less parking and wanting to provide metro passes, or considering that the development is close to a metro stop, is not a solution to this parking problem. Because again, it's penalizing people who are in need of affordable housing or any housing, but also need to use a car, use a personal vehicle to go to work. And that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Ross. We appreciate it. Our next speaker is Benjamin Baharach. Rahich. I'm sure I butchered your name, so please say it for me and then spell it, please.
Ms. Clark, you did very well. It was so close. So Benjamin, last name Bohorich, that's B as in boy, A-H-O-R-I-C-H.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's a tough one. Everybody gets it wrong. No worries. Yeah, I just had a couple of comments, and I'll just list them out really quickly, and hopefully this will help the discussion here. So one, on deed restrictions, I believe those control development, since those deal with property rights. So, you know, if you're living in a deed restricted neighborhood, the odds are extremely low that, you know, if they say single family is the way that, you know, the deed restrictions read, it would be difficult for us to, or for me to imagine that you could still build, you know, a multifamily type structure, because deed restrictions pretty much control development from that standpoint. That being said, if we did want to create lower cost, you know, developments for lower income families, if we did define single family as 1 through 4 families, you know, up to 4 families on a single lot, I guess it is possible that you could, if you were able to rewrite the code that's how it works, up to 4 families would still describe a single family development. Then at that point, I guess you might be able to fit within the deed restrictions. But anyway, the point being that I think you might still find yourself in a legal battle if somebody in the you know, one of the neighbors didn't like you building a 4-family development. They might still be able to try to fight you on that. And so that kind of answers the question a little bit, some of the questions that have been posed earlier on deed restrictions, but then also poses another one, I guess, which would be to anyone to answer who's knowledgeable on the subject of how the city ordinances relate to, I guess, the potential that, you know, lawsuits might develop from, you know, neighbors when you're talking about single family developments. So that's the first thing. Second thing, allowing ADUs, 2-unit ADUs, I think is a great idea. We actually, I know of a property that has two units that are in an ADU with some parking underneath, and I think it works great. The key thing brought up by multiple people here was parking. So I do think we still need to have parking required, but it might not need to be as much as is required in a multifamily situation. Because it's still a lot lower density than, you know, multifamily is typically. So maybe instead of requiring 1.25 spaces for a studio like you would have in a multifamily building, maybe you only need one space for a studio, for instance. Just an idea.
Great, thank you so much. Savita, there was a question in there. Is that something that you can answer or venture to answer or would like to get back to him on?
I did not very clearly get the answer, the question. If the question was, what happens if there is a legal dispute about the deed restrictions versus what the ordinance says? That's how I heard the question, but I'm not absolutely sure if that's what the question was. Can you please clarify?
Sure. So I think, so this is Ben Bohort speaking again. I think that deed restrictions control. So
Yep.
I guess that should ease the concern of someone who's trying to, who's worried about somebody developing something next to them in a single family neighborhood that would have 4 families on it. I first of all, I kind of doubt that that's really possible in most neighborhoods. So I don't think that that's too big of a concern, because I would imagine that most of the time we're talking about allowing a 4-family, structure to be developed in a neighborhood that doesn't necessarily have deed restrictions, would be my guess. That would probably be the more common case.
Yes, that is the most common case. If there are deed restrictions, no matter what the ordinance says, the deed restrictions will supersede. So
Right.
we are talking about if there are no deed restrictions, what could be the number of units on a lot? And then, yes, like you pointed out, the definition of single family that is existing today may have to change. So that is something we will discuss with legal as we proceed in this process.
Great, thank you, Ms. Benke. Did that answer your question?
Yes, that was very helpful.
Okay, great, thank you. Tamara, it looks like we still have a few people signed
Yes,
up.
yes, we do, Madam Chair. The next speaker is Robin Holzer, followed by Wilson Calvert.
Great. Robin Holzer?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know when I came to listen to this meeting that I was going to sign up to speak, so I'll try to get my thoughts out coherently. I'm speaking as a homeowner and a transportation advocate in Montrose. This topic is near and dear to me as someone who I'm raising school children in a neighborhood where property values are climbing like crazy, and I'm watching my kids, friends, families leave because they cannot afford rising rents. So the first thing I want to say is thank you for the work you're doing to figure out how we can get as many Houston homeowners as possible and equip them to add ADUs and other sorts of affordable rental units in our neighborhoods. We really need this and we need it soon. So thanks for that. The second thing I want to talk about, though, is this business around parking, because there's no such thing as free parking. All of the parking that we provide and that we require people to provide is paid for by everyone who uses those facilities. So it shows up in your grocery costs, it shows up in your rent, it shows up in the cost of your dinner out. And so I want to be on the record both for reducing parking requirements, and I want to be on the record for supporting allowing owners to put up to 4 ADUs, or sorry, up to 4 units on a single family lot by right. The thing about parking is this. I have no doubt that developers will continue to offer parking for the tenants and would-be tenants who demand it. The question is, as a matter of public policy, when will the city stop requiring us to offer parking to everyone, whether they need it or not? I look around my community and I see young workers, I see older, retired women, I see young families who cannot afford their cars, who don't own cars at all. In my office, more than half of commute trips happen by walk or bike or transit. That car ownership costs $9,000 to $10,000 a year on average for just the most basic of automobiles. And that's out of reach for a huge swath of our community. So I guess the final thing I want to say is I would encourage this committee to think in terms of transit-oriented development broadly, but transit-oriented ADUs in specific. And the idea that, for example, my house, I've got 3 frequent bus routes between 1.25 miles from me. The Westheimer 82 is the busiest bus route in the state. It doesn't make sense to require me to put it, or me in general, but people specifically, when transit-oriented living is easy in my community, it doesn't make sense for us to make renters pay for parking spots they don't need. It won't work everywhere, and that's fine. But I think we need to figure out how to make it work where we can, because it makes units more affordable for the people who need them most. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. We appreciate it. So, Mr. Wilson Calvert.
Hello, my name is Wilson Calvert. Last name is spelled C-A-L-V as in Victor, E-R-T. Many of my comments, Robin actually just mentioned. I also currently live in Montrose and currently live near several high-frequency bus networks and don't live in an area that currently has any way to reduce the parking minimums. If somebody did want to add on additional housing on their land, the transit-oriented development ordinance is wonderful, but it doesn't apply to every neighborhood in Houston. There are several neighborhoods that are near a lot of the high frequency bus lines that should have the ability to provide that housing without the parking attached to it. As Mahmoud talked about earlier, we have several new bus lines, Boost, really high quality forms of transit that are coming in. And again, it doesn't make sense to eliminate at this point all parking requirements across the entirety of the city of Houston, but we have several neighborhoods that have high density, that have plenty of opportunities for people to live without owning a car, and we shouldn't force them to pay for their car storage. I also think it's important to offer up to the 40 units per lot as a right. I know that you mentioned that there's going to be restrictions, whether it be FAR, which is probably an okay idea, but it is important that we look at reducing those parking requirements, because as far as I know, this is the only kind of method on the books that we're looking at in the city of Houston to further reduce parking requirements right now. The City of Houston Climate Action Plan calls for the elimination of all parking requirements by 2030. And that's 2030 is only 7.5 years from now. And so that's just right around the corner. So we need to continue to take steps to push the momentum forward and hopefully make some more progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. We appreciate it. Tamara, do I have anyone else signed up to speak?
There's no one else signed up to speak, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else listening on the call that would like to speak? Okay. Well, with that, we will adjourn this meeting. And I thank all of you guys for all of your input and your comments and concerns. And staff, I appreciate the work that you guys are doing. And we will see everyone again on August 10th.
Sunny and Lisa, thank you both very much for your input this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Margaret. Thank you, Director.
Thank you so much for chairs and everyone who joined. Thank you all. Bye.
See you in August, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
We'll stop the recording now.
Make sure you go to letstalkhouston.com and put in your answers.